Mistress drugged the millionaire to scandalize him, but his pregnant wife set a trap to expose her. Welcome, dear viewers, to a story that weaves betrayal, desire, and cunning into a web of unforgettable intrigue. Today, we delve into the hidden world of high society, where wealth sparkles like diamonds, yet secrets fester beneath polished smiles. Our protagonist is Edward Harrington, a millionaire businessman admired for his success and envied for his fortune. At the heart of this tangled drama stands a mysterious mistress, Veronica Jones, whose desperation drives her to commit the unthinkable. Opposite her is Samantha Harrington, Edward's devoted wife, who suspects foul play. Together, they become entangled in a high-stakes game of deceit, power, and ultimate revelation. Edward Harrington was, by every outward standard, living the dream, tall, with the tailored suits of a refined businessman and the polished manners inherited from his aristocratic maternal family. He was the kind of man who commanded respect as soon as he entered a room. His fortune, amassed through a series of innovative tech startups and savvy real estate investments, allowed him the lifestyle most could only imagine. He had a hillside mansion in Malibu, a brownstone in Manhattan, and a private villa in Tuscany. He was, in many ways, emblematic of success. Edward's wife, Samantha Harrington, often called Sam by her closest friends, was equally admired. A former art gallery curator with a keen eye for detail, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew her worth. Her long auburn hair and graceful poise completed the picture of a perfect power couple by Edward's side. She was the one who could charm anyone into conversation at society galas, who could effortlessly blend into any gathering while radiating warmth that drew people in. For many years their marriage was strong. They talked in the evenings over a glass of wine, joked about the silly antics of their dog, Winston, and planned philanthropic initiatives together. Samantha's passion for art and Edward's for technology fused in a philanthropic mission to sponsor underprivileged children in the arts. They donated a grand sum annually to the esteemed Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, often in secret, never seeking publicity. However, behind the gilded edges of Edward's life, a hidden crack was beginning to form. Despite Samantha's unwavering support and his outwardly impeccable reputation, Edward had been courting disaster in the form of a beautiful and ambitious mistress named Veronica Jones. Veronica was a striking brunette with high cheekbones, a commanding gaze, and an irresistible charm. She had worked as a public relations consultant for one of Edward's smaller tech ventures, forging a connection with him that quickly crossed professional boundaries. She managed to ignite in Edward a desire for excitement, a spark he feared had gone stale in his carefully ordered life. At first, it was harmless flirting during corporate events, but soon Edward found himself meeting Veronica for coffee, then for lunch, eventually for late-night rendezvous that turned physical. He rationalized these secret excursions. He and Samantha were too busy drifting apart, right? Veronica promised something new and thrilling, while not asking him to rearrange his entire life. So he told himself. But what Edward brushed off as a harmless affair soon became a dangerous labyrinth. Veronica was not satisfied with a mere fling, she wanted more. She was clever enough to keep her intentions well veiled at first, but her ambitions were grand. She visualized a future where she could make Edward her stepping stone, not just to money, but to the status that came with it. And Edward, so enthralled by the adrenaline of secrecy, was too blinded to see the trap being laid at his feet. Thus, in the hush of a mansion perched above the Pacific and in the penthouse suites of five-star hotels, seeds of betrayal were sown. Samantha felt the breeze of doubt stirring in her once quiet mind, but she had no real evidence. She only had that intangible sense that something somehow was not as it should be. A quickening of Edward's heartbeat when he glanced at his phone, a certain distraction in his eyes, a contrived excuse to stay late at the office. Samantha was perceptive, but she bided her time. She did not realize, at first, how close their lives were to toppling off a cliff, nor did Edward, for that matter. Veronica, on the other hand, saw the entire future in her mind's eye, one that involved dethroning Samantha and stepping into her place. She only needed the perfect scandal to make it possible. Veronica Jones was born in a small Indiana town to hard-working parents who could only provide her with modest opportunities. From a young age, she resolved to elevate herself beyond the confines of her upbringing. She devoured magazines featuring glamorous women, wealthy tycoons, and the exotic corners of the world. Where others might have seen a fantasy, she saw a roadmap to her future. Determined, she moved to Los Angeles in her early 20s, used her quick wit and natural allure to connect with the city's young professionals, and gradually climbed the ladder in public relations. By the time she met Edward Harrington, Veronica was already known for her ability to manipulate public perception. She was the kind of PR consultant who could spin a fiasco into a triumphant comeback. Her skill was in reading people, their desires, their weaknesses. Edward, successful and socially prominent but craving something intangible, was precisely the kind of man she had studied for years. It wasn't enough for her to simply become an accessory in his life. She wanted to replace those who overshadowed her. She was a woman on a mission to secure not just a role by Edward's side, but total dominance over his world. Her plan began with subtle, emotional hooks. She would casually mention her struggles, painting herself as someone who overcame adversity. She flattered Edward's intelligence, empathized with his daily pressures. She was careful to never directly criticize Samantha, but she sprinkled seeds of envy and doubt, implying that maybe Samantha didn't truly understand him as she did. Yet, Veronica realized that merely winning Edward's heart wouldn't be enough to unseat Samantha. The Harrington marriage was, by outward appearances, stable, and Samantha had a respectable social circle. The philanthropic collaborations between Edward and Samantha were admired in the city's elite circles. No matter how enthralling Veronica was, as long as Samantha stood behind Edward, Veronica would remain an interloper. Hence, Veronica concocted a more sinister plan. She would orchestrate a scandal so big, so catastrophic, that Edward's marriage to Samantha would be irreparably shaken. Then, in the aftermath, Veronica would offer herself as the loving, supportive partner Edward desperately needed. It was a high-stakes gamble, requiring both cunning and cruelty. But Veronica had risked everything before, and she was prepared to do so again. The first hint of treachery revealed itself to Edward on a breezy afternoon. Veronica arranged a private lunch at a chic rooftop restaurant in downtown Los Angeles. With the skyline behind them, she teased him about becoming a family man. When would he finally walk away from his marriage? Edward quickly dismissed the question, cautioning that he would never want to humiliate Samantha, especially given her high standing in philanthropic circles. Veronica felt a flash of irritation. This was not the response she wanted, but she masked her anger with a laugh that tinkled like crystal and changed the subject. Over dessert, she skillfully probed him about his personal weaknesses. Did he ever fear scandalous rumors in the media? Did he worry about a competitor digging up dirt? Edward, clueless to her motives, found himself opening up about the various corporate predators who might want to tarnish his name to get ahead. Veronica nodded sympathetically, absorbing every word. She was building her arsenal step by step. Meanwhile, Samantha, unaware of the specifics but increasingly sure something was amiss, started observing her husband with more scrutiny. She noticed small stains on Edward's shirts that didn't match the color of her lipstick. faint traces of perfume she didn't own, or the occasional text message on his phone that seemed to bring a secret smile to his face. Samantha's heart clenched with apprehension, yet she kept her emotions in check. She would confront him eventually, but first she wanted tangible proof. She had no idea that Veronica's ambitions reached far beyond mere seduction. Samantha Harrington's old college friend, Lisa D'Amico, came to visit one afternoon. Lisa, an investigative journalist working for a reputable magazine in New York, had uncovered more than her fair share of hidden truths over the years. She had an uncanny sixth sense for detecting secrets, a skill she frequently used in her profession. The pair had once been almost inseparable, and though life had taken them to different coasts, they remained close in heart. Over coffee, Samantha confided in Lisa her growing unease about Edward's behavior. "He's been absent," she admitted, eyes downcast. "He denies any wrongdoing, but I can sense something's changed." Lisa, never one to mince words, asked pointed questions. "Does he have new female colleagues? Has anyone suspiciously attached themselves to him?" Samantha hesitated, remembering a woman named Veronica Jones that Edward had once mentioned in passing. At the time, the name meant little, but combined with the nagging sense that something was off, the memory leapt out. "Veronica Jones," Samantha said quietly, rolling the name around her tongue like a bitter pill. "She's a PR consultant. She's attractive, confident, and they've been spending time together, at least professionally." Lisa's gaze sharpened. "PR consultant, you say? I've come across a Veronica Jones in a few corporate exposes, someone known for spinning narratives to her advantage. But that could be a coincidence. Let me dig deeper." Later that evening, Lisa opened her laptop, searching through her archives. She discovered that a Veronica Jones had been involved with a high-stakes scandal in the entertainment industry some years back. Rumors suggested she'd orchestrated dramatic situations for personal gain, though nothing was proven. Lisa's instincts flared to life, the same name, the same line of work, and an uncanny pattern of hooking high-profile clients. Samantha, meanwhile, hovered between dread and desperation. She didn't want to believe Edward was crossing lines that would damage their marriage, but the facts were too glaring to ignore. The following morning, she mustered the courage to approach him directly. "Edward," she said, voice firm yet trembling, "I need to talk to you about something important." She kept her tone neutral, not wanting to raise an argument without proof. He looked up from his laptop, surprise crossing his face. "Of course," he said softly, motioning her to join him. Samantha felt a wave of conflicting emotions. She still loved him deeply, after all. "Is everything all right?" he pressed gently. She paused, searching his eyes for truth. "I've been feeling disconnected from you lately. I've noticed changes in your routine, your behavior, and I can't help wondering if it involves someone else." Edward stiffened, guilt flickering across his gaze. But he had grown adept at lying to himself, and thus to others. "Sam, you know how demanding business can be," he replied, forcing a small laugh. "I've been pouring myself into these new deals. There's no one else." Samantha studied him. There was a time she would have believed his every word without question. Yet now she felt a steeliness in her spine she hadn't realized she possessed. "We'll talk more later," she said, not pressing further. "I just wanted you to know I see something's off." Edward offered a reassuring smile, but it never reached his eyes. That night, Samantha confided her suspicions to Lisa, who offered a suggestion: "If you want to really see what's going on, hire a private investigator." Samantha hesitated. She was a proud woman, and the idea of prying into her husband's life didn't sit well with her. Yet, desperation for clarity overwhelmed her reservations. That night, after a lengthy conversation, she decided to contact someone. Lisa recommended a discreet but highly effective private investigator named Jack Griffin. Samantha felt a mix of fear and resolve. She was about to open a door that might never be closed. While Samantha and Lisa quietly prepared for the private investigation, Veronica Jones was refining her own sinister plan. She had begun researching substances that could induce disorientation and memory lapses, nothing too dangerous, but potent enough to compromise Edward. Her plan was borderline diabolical: drug Edward at a private event, stage incriminating photos or videos, and then threaten exposure unless he publicly severed ties with Samantha. It was a gamble that could easily backfire, but Veronica believed in her capacity to control outcomes. She studied everything from party drugs to prescription sedatives. Finally, she settled on a mild benzodiazepine that dissolved quickly in liquid. Administered in a calculated dose, it could make Edward appear delirious or possibly unconscious without posing a major health risk, at least in Veronica's amateur estimation. She felt only slight pangs of guilt, quickly brushed aside by her vision of living the life she deserved. To set the stage, she planned a lavish soiree under the guise of a corporate networking event. She would book the rooftop of a new luxury hotel in downtown Los Angeles, the kind of place where the city's movers and shakers gathered. Veronica had the perfect pretext: a product launch celebration for one of Edward's smaller tech ventures, for which she handled PR. It wouldn't be odd for her to host or for Edward to attend. Veronica's intention was to spike Edward's drink at the height of the evening, around the time paparazzi might be loitering near the entrance or in the wings, hoping to capture glimpses of high-profile guests. She had already reached out discreetly to a couple of freelance photographers she knew would do just about anything for the right price. She didn't need the mainstream press yet, just the potential of damaging photos that she could share strategically. Edward, blissfully unaware of the Black Widow spinning her web, found himself spending more late nights with Veronica. She would invite him for dinner or drinks, always in exclusive lounges, ensuring he was enveloped in an atmosphere that felt illicit, yet thrilling. He told Samantha they were client meetings and late business strategies, growing more adept at weaving half-truths. Meanwhile, Jack Griffin, the private investigator, began tailing Edward at Samantha's request. He was a meticulous man, ex-military, with a knack for blending into crowds. Over the course of a week, he confirmed Edward's numerous rendezvous with Veronica. He documented their dinner dates, the hotels she booked, and the suspicious hush that surrounded their interactions. He noted how often Veronica checked over her shoulder, a sure sign she was anxious about being followed or discovered. Jack reported his findings to Samantha and Lisa, who conferred in whispered conversations in the late hours of the night. Samantha's heart clenched with each new detail, but she steeled herself. She told Lisa and Jack, "I need more than evidence of an affair. I have a feeling Veronica's up to something bigger." She recalled how Edward had once offhandedly mentioned Veronica's unrelenting ambition, how she always angled for more control in any project. Samantha's instincts whispered that an affair alone wouldn't be Veronica's endgame. With the so-called product launch celebration looming, Samantha decided to use the upcoming event to her advantage. "If she's going to make a move, it will be then," Lisa surmised. Samantha agreed. They began strategizing. Jack Griffin, with his experience in surveillance, was integral to the plan. He proposed setting up covert cameras in areas of the event venue. Samantha suggested enlisting a few trusted friends to help keep watch. Though her heart ached, Samantha pressed on with unwavering resolve. She loved Edward, but she was no fool. Her marriage and her reputation were on the line, and Veronica's machinations posed a grave threat to both. If all went according to plan, by the end of that event, Veronica Jones would find herself trapped in her own cunning game. The evening of the rooftop celebration arrived with all the glitz and glamour Veronica had meticulously orchestrated. The newly opened Skyline Pavilion Hotel, a soaring structure of polished glass and steel, was swathed in golden light. The rooftop terrace offered a panoramic view of downtown Los Angeles, a sparkling urban tapestry that made guests feel like royalty surveying their kingdom. Veronica had spared no expense. A string quartet played a modern repertoire near the entrance, waiters in black tie. Attire served trays of champagne, and an illuminated fountain centerpiece provided a luxurious focal point. Tech executives, media influencers, and minor celebrities roamed in designer gowns and sharp tuxedos. Veronica glided through the crowd in a figure-hugging emerald dress that turned heads at every corner. Edward arrived fashionably late, as Veronica had suggested. She wanted him to make an entrance that would draw everyone's attention. He wore a charcoal suit paired with a midnight blue tie, exuding an air of restrained power. Samantha, uninvited by Veronica's design, was conspicuously absent, fueling whispers among some guests about possible tensions between the Harringtons. Little did Veronica know, Samantha was indeed present, watching from a private balcony in the adjacent building, accompanied by Lisa and Jack Griffin. Through a pair of high-powered binoculars, Samantha could see the entire terrace. She could spot her husband's tall frame navigating the crowd, occasionally stopping to engage in polite conversation. Inside the event, Jack Griffin had placed covert mini-cameras along strategic points, near the bar, along the perimeter of the terrace, and at a lounge area where guests might slip away for quieter talks. The images fed into a secure recording device in the nearby building, where Samantha and Lisa watched everything unfold in real time. All around, the atmosphere crackled with the electric energy of a successful launch event. Tech demos showcased the newest product, an interactive platform rumored to revolutionize how businesses manage their online presence. Guests marveled at the sleek design and sipped expensive wine. Yet, overshadowing all the merriment was the tension that Veronica carried like a well-kept secret. She had the drug hidden in her satin clutch, and she was waiting for the perfect moment to slip it into Edward's drink. Just as the band transitioned to a lively waltz, Veronica approached Edward with 2 glasses of champagne, a dazzling smile on her lips. She handed him one, then raised her own in a toast. "To the future," she cooed, the double meaning unspoken but understood by them both. Edward, flattered, clinked glasses and took a sip. From the adjacent rooftop, Samantha's heart thundered in her chest. "Jack, can you see that?" she asked, voice taut. One of the camera feeds captured Veronica slipping a small packet into her own champagne glass. She made a show of swirling it gently, then reached out as though to pat Edward's shoulder in a playful gesture, during which, in one fluid motion, she switched her glass with Edward's. It was so well rehearsed and subtle that most onlookers wouldn't have noticed, but the cameras did. Samantha's grip on the binoculars tightened, her knuckles turned white. A swirl of rage and fear coursed through her veins. On screen, Edward took several more sips. He laughed with Veronica, oblivious to the betrayal in motion. Soon, his posture grew a little slack, his eyes a bit glazed. Veronica watched him intently, lips curving into a triumphant smile. Lisa exhaled shakily. "It's happening, Sam. She's doing it." Jack Griffin, who had been milling around the event in the guise of a guest, discreetly positioned himself closer to Edward. He was ready to intervene if the situation became dangerous. Samantha shut her eyes for a brief moment, summoning the strength to witness what was about to transpire. The plan was to let Veronica incriminate herself on camera, to catch her in the act of staging whatever scandal she intended to produce. Only then could Samantha reveal the evidence and exonerate Edward. It was a perilous strategy, but there was no other way to prove Veronica's malicious intent. Within minutes, the drug began to take effect. Edward swayed slightly, and his words slurred when he attempted to greet a fellow tech entrepreneur. Veronica, feigning concern, slid an arm around his waist, guiding him toward a more secluded corner of the terrace. Cameras, intentionally stationed by Veronica's hired paparazzi, began to flash. She pretended to shield Edward, but each movement was calculated to deliver the perfect, scandalous shot. To any casual observer, it looked like Edward was either heavily intoxicated or in the throes of some emotional collapse, both of which reflected poorly on a man of his standing. On the adjacent rooftop, Samantha and Lisa watched in horror as Veronica led Edward behind a row of potted palms at the terrace's edge. Nearby, a few guests caught glimpses of the unfolding scene, some whispering, others snapping clandestine photos with their phones. Veronica's orchestrated spectacle was in full swing. Jack Griffin followed them, keeping his distance. He positioned himself near the palm trees, pretending to admire the city lights. He could hear Veronica cooing words of faux sympathy. "Oh, Edward, let me help you. Don't worry, I'll take care of you." She stroked his cheek, guiding him toward a chaise lounge that had been placed there for ambience. Suddenly, one of Veronica's pre-arranged paparazzi popped up, camera clicking away. Veronica didn't even feign surprise. She gave the photographer a look that said, "Got what you need." The flashbulb lit Edward's bewildered expression, capturing the moment he appeared heavily compromised while Veronica hovered protectively over him. "Perfect," Veronica whispered, loud enough for Edward, but not for the camera. Her face wore an expression of vindication, as if she'd just checkmated a game of chess. That was Jack's cue. He stepped forward abruptly, wearing a concerned face that doubled as a facade. "Sir, are you all right?" he asked Edward, while glaring at the paparazzo. "Who are you? This area is private." Veronica masked her annoyance expertly. "He's just having a bit too much to drink," she said, affecting worry. "He needs some fresh air." The paparazzo, capturing a final flurry of photos, slinked off, satisfied with his bounty. Edward mumbled incoherently. The world was spinning for him. He recognized Jack Griffin vaguely. Didn't he see him around Samantha once? But his mind was too fogged to piece things together. All he wanted was to lie down. Meanwhile, Samantha and Lisa shared a sharp glance. "We have enough," Lisa murmured, checking the camera feeds that had recorded the entire drugging sequence. Samantha set her jaw, adrenaline surging. It was time to spring the trap that would confirm Veronica's guilt before a larger audience. She'd already arranged a contingency plan with the event staff. A loyal friend of Samantha, an event manager named Christine Park, stood by, ready to escort security or call attention to the fiasco if necessary. Down on the terrace, Veronica motioned for one of the event staff to help her move Edward inside, presumably to a private suite she'd booked in advance. The staffer, following her instructions, nodded. Jack Griffin stayed close, determined to record every movement. On the other side, Christine Park quietly signaled the hotel's security team, instructing them to converge on Veronica's suite once they saw a specific signal, a text message reading green light. Samantha felt her chest constrict as she witnessed her husband practically being carried away. She reminded herself that Jack was right there and that they had medical staff on standby if anything went wrong. Despite the swirl of anger, betrayal and heartbreak, she held on to one unwavering resolve. After this night, Veronica Jones would never again threaten her marriage or her peace. The path from the rooftop terrace led to a corridor of private suites reserved for VIP guests. Veronica maneuvered Edward with a combination of manipulative tenderness and brisk efficiency. Jack Griffin kept a measured distance, ensuring he wouldn't lose them. Two unsuspecting hotel staffers helped guide Edward, now barely conscious, into Suite 1902, a lavish room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the neon sprawl of Los Angeles. Once inside, Veronica dismissed the hotel staff, feigning gratitude. "Thank you, I can take it from here," she said, in a hushed, urgent tone. Relieved to relinquish responsibility, the staffers backed out, offering well wishes to a clearly unwell Edward. They closed the door, leaving Veronica, Edward, and Jack still pretending to be a concerned colleague alone. Veronica rounded on Jack. "What are you doing here?" she demanded in a whisper. Suspicion flickered in her eyes. She hadn't accounted for him. "I'm just worried about Edward," Jack replied, his voice cool. "He's the face of the company, after all. This is bad PR. Let me call a doctor." He reached for his phone, but Veronica grabbed his wrist. "No," she hissed. "No doctors, no drama." She forced a tight laugh. "He's just had one too many. I'll let him rest, and then he can head home. No need to make this a scandal." Jack gave her a probing look. Under the bright lights of the suite, Veronica's veneer was cracking. She seemed tense. Her pupils dilated not just from the night's excitement, but from the knowledge that she was walking a perilous line. The paparazzo was meant to capture scandalous photos and vanish, not linger. And now this unknown man was meddling. She needed him gone. "I'll stay until he recovers," Jack insisted, making a point to appear naive. "He's an important colleague." Veronica's lips tightened. She considered her options. If she pushed too hard, she'd look suspicious. But she needed privacy to orchestrate any further incriminating evidence, perhaps something more tangible to use against Edward. Maybe photographs of them in a compromising situation. She had planned meticulously, bringing a small hidden camera in her purse, but that required Edward to be alone with her. "Fine," she said sweetly. "Get him some water from the bar over there." She pointed to a marble-topped counter. Jack nodded obligingly, walking across the room to fetch a glass of water, though he had no intention of giving her the solitude she craved. In a moment of cunning desperation, Veronica stepped back to her bag, palming a tiny camera device no larger than a pack of gum. If she could stage just a few close-up shots, her leaning over Edward, lips parted, clothing rumpled, perhaps an angle that implied intimacy, she'd have powerful blackmail material. She could claim Edward forced himself on her while drunk, or that they had an affair of unstoppable passion. Either narrative would be devastating for Edward and humiliating for Samantha. Yet, before Veronica could position the camera, Jack turned around. She froze, hiding the device behind her back. Edward, sprawled on the chaise lounge, groaned. Samantha," he mumbled in a half-conscious plea. "Samantha can't help you now," Veronica muttered under her breath, bitterness flaring. Jack offered Edward the water, then turned to Veronica, stepping closer. In one swift, unexpected move, he grasped the device from her hand. His reflexes were honed from years of investigative work. Veronica gasped, her facade crumbling. "What are you doing with this?" Jack asked icily. He recognized it as a small digital camera with high-resolution capabilities. "You planning on making a little home movie?" Veronica's eyes blazed with anger and fear. Her perfect plan was teetering on the brink of collapse, undone by this unassuming man who refused to leave. She had to pivot. She let out a theatrical cry, flinging herself away from Jack and shrieking, "Get away from me! Help! He's hurting me!" She hoped to lure security or staff to twist the narrative in her favor, but it was too late. The door burst open, revealing Christine Park and two security personnel. Samantha and Lisa stood right behind them. Cameras from both Jack and the security team were rolling, capturing Veronica's meltdown. Samantha rushed to Edward's side, brushing his hair back from his forehead, tears brimming in her eyes as she saw the state he was in. In that moment, Veronica realized all her illusions were shattered. She was surrounded, caught red-handed with the camera, with no plausible explanation. Security had footage of her cry for help, which was obviously contrived. She showed no bruises or sign of actual distress. On the contrary, Jack's calm demeanor spoke volumes. Samantha's voice, low and trembling with controlled fury, cut through the tense silence. "Veronica Jones, you've gone too far. We have everything on film from the moment you drugged my husband to now. The game is over." Veronica stared at Samantha, her expression a mixture of shock, rage, and a last vestige of haughty defiance. She let out a mirthless laugh. "So, this was your plan all along? A sting operation?" she spat, tossing her hair back. Samantha gently placed Edward's head on a plush pillow, reassuring him in a soft voice that everything would be all right. Then she rose to her full height, meeting Veronica's glare with unwavering resolve. "Yes," she said simply. "I couldn't let you ruin him or us without a fight." Christine Park stepped forward, brandishing her phone. "We alerted the police. They'll be here soon. Possession of a controlled substance, intent to harm, blackmail, there's a whole list of potential charges." Veronica's eyes flicked to the door, then back to Samantha. She weighed her chances of sprinting for an escape, but the two security guards stood blocking any attempt to flee. Panic rippled across her features for the first time. "You don't understand," she seethed, voice trembling. "Edward and he loves me, and I love him." She pointed accusingly at Samantha. "You've kept him chained in a loveless marriage." Samantha cut her off, voice steady but smouldering with controlled emotion. "Don't you dare. My marriage isn't perfect, no marriage is, but you will not rewrite history to play the victim." She threw a glance at Lisa, who nodded, stepping forward with a laptop that displayed real-time footage from the rooftop cameras. "We have you on tape, exchanging the champagne glasses, spiking his drink, coordinating with paparazzi. It's all there." She clicked a few keys, and Veronica's face turned ashen at the sight of her own actions, magnified on the laptop screen. Jack Griffin added, "We also have evidence linking you to previous attempts at blackmail in other industries. You've built quite the career out of orchestrating these crises, haven't you, Miss Jones?" Veronica opened her mouth, words failing her as she realized the full extent of her exposure. For all her cunning, she hadn't expected Samantha's countermove. Her carefully constructed tower of illusions was tumbling down. Outside, the faint wail of approaching sirens signaled the arrival of law enforcement. Edward stirred on the chaise lounge, groaning as he tried to open his eyes. Samantha rushed to his side, grasping his hand in hers. "Edward, it's me. Everything is going to be all right. Just stay with me," she whispered, tears blurring her vision. He tried to focus on his wife's face, confusion etched across his features. "Sam, what's happening?" She gently stroked his cheek. "We'll explain everything soon. For now, just rest. We have people here to help you." Veronica, cornered and out of time, attempted one last act of manipulation. She marched over to Edward, ignoring everyone else. "Edward, tell them," she insisted, voice cracking. "Tell them you wanted me, that you're leaving her for me." She sounded more desperate than ever, tears and fury melding into an ugly cocktail of emotion. Edward blinked, still battling the drug's effects. He murmured, his voice unsteady. In that moment, his gaze flicked to Samantha, her tearful eyes, her trembling lips. Something within him shifted. He might have lied to himself before, but now, drugged and defenseless, only truth remained. "Samantha," he whispered, forging through the haze. He reached for her hand. "I'm so sorry." The heartbreak and love interlaced in Samantha's gaze told its own story. She pressed her palm to his. "We'll talk about it later. Right now, I just want you safe." Behind them, the door swung open and two police officers entered. Veronica involuntarily stepped backward. Her eyes darted about, seeking any exit, any means of escape, but found none. The police officers, a man and a woman in crisp uniforms, surveyed the scene. One noticed Edward's groggy state while the other honed in on Veronica, whose trembling hand still clutched the small camera device. Lisa and Christine rushed to hand over the video evidence they had compiled on their phones and the laptop. Jack Griffin calmly explained the sequence of events, from the rooftop party to the moment they all entered the suite. Veronica, visibly shaken, tried one last desperate ploy. "This is a misunderstanding," she exclaimed, struggling to maintain composure. "That camera, it's mine, but for my PR work." "I never drugged him. He was drinking all night. They're framing me." But the officers remained impassive. One of them, Officer Johnson, viewed the footage from the hidden cameras, which clearly showed Veronica spiking Edward's drink. The second officer, Officer Morales, looked to Edward, who was being examined by on-site paramedics. Samantha hovered protectively, tears glistening in her eyes. "We have enough evidence to arrest you for attempted assault and other charges," Officer Johnson told Veronica firmly. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Veronica's face twisted in denial. "You can't do this. He's my lover, my fiancé. He would never press charges against me." She lunged toward Edward, but the officers quickly restrained her. Samantha found an unexpected calm settle over her in that moment, watching as Veronica's venomous lies unraveled in real time. In a surreal twist, she almost felt pity for the woman, someone so consumed by ambition and desperation that she'd ruin lives, including her own, to fulfill a twisted fantasy. Lisa stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on Samantha's shoulder. "You did what you had to do," she murmured. "Edward is safe now, and that's what matters." Paramedics finished their initial assessment of Edward. One of them, a kind-faced man named Daniel Fletcher, explained, "We suspect a sedative in his system. He'll need hospital evaluation, but his vitals are stable. It doesn't appear life-threatening, fortunately." Samantha's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. As Edward was placed on a gurney for transport, his hand found Samantha's and held on tightly. His eyes, though still clouded by the drug's influence, were filled with guilt and remorse. But for now, Samantha only squeezed back, offering silent forgiveness. There would be time enough for reckoning later. Veronica, on the other hand, was led away in handcuffs, her face streaked with tears and fury. She locked eyes with Samantha in a final glare of hatred, but Samantha refused to look away. She needed to see the ending to this nightmare, to be certain it was real. Jack Griffin exhaled a long breath once the police had escorted Veronica out. "I'll gather all the footage and documents, pass them to the authorities," he told Samantha. "You might need to testify, but I think it'll be pretty straightforward," Samantha nodded. The surge of adrenaline that had fueled her now drained away, leaving her trembling. She reached for Lisa, who enveloped her in a hug. "Thank you," Samantha murmured. "Both of you. I couldn't have done this without you." Lisa gave her a supportive smile. "That's what friends are for." As paramedics and police officers bustled around them, the suite that once glittered with Veronica's illusions of grandeur lay in disarray. Half-empty champagne glasses, scattered party favors, and the lingering scent of Edward's near downfall contrasted sharply with the swirl of medics and law enforcement. In that chaos, Samantha found an odd sense of peace. Veronica's hold over Edward was broken, and the Harringtons could now face the truth, no matter how painful. Samantha rode with Edward in the ambulance to Cedar-Sinai Hospital. The paramedics had stabilized him, placing him on the fourth fluids to flush out the sedative. Edward drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally murmuring apologies or calling her name. Samantha gently stroked his hair, her heart torn between anger, hurt, and a deep, unyielding love. At the hospital, Edward was taken in for a series of tests. While waiting, Samantha stared blankly at the sterile white walls, the beep of medical machinery forming a strange lullaby that mirrored the turmoil in her mind. Lisa and Jack arrived later, after giving their statements to the police. They found Samantha in a small waiting area, hugging herself against the chill of the hospital's air conditioning. "How is he?" Lisa asked, sitting down beside her friend. "He's stable," Samantha replied, voice subdued. "They're running toxicology tests. The doctor said he should be fine. Physically, anyway." Jack chimed in softly. After he's released, I imagine the police will want to question him about Veronica. Samantha nodded, eyes downcast. Yes, and we'll cooperate. It's important to prove her guilt beyond any doubt. An hour later, a nurse emerged, beckoning Samantha into Edward's private room. He was propped up on pillows, pale but lucid. He met her gaze with an expression of profound remorse. Samantha approached slowly, unsure of what to say. She wanted to rail at him for betraying her, for lying, for allowing Veronica's presence in their life. Yet, seeing him frail, she remembered her vows of love, the bright days before suspicion darkened their union. Edward took a shaky breath. Sam, I don't know how to start apologizing. She pulled a chair close to his bed, taking his hand. Then maybe just start with the truth, she said quietly. How did this happen, Edward? His voice trembled. I was stupid, Sam. I felt like we were drifting apart. Veronica, she was seductive and exciting. It never seemed like a big deal at first, just a rush. I didn't think she'd go this far. And I'm ashamed to say I didn't even see how manipulative she was. I was blinded by my own restlessness. Samantha's eyes glistened with tears, but she forced them back. You betrayed my trust, Edward. You broke what we had. He squeezed her hand, tears escaping down his cheeks. I know, and I'm sorry. I will do anything counseling, a separation, time away, whatever you need. I'll do it. Samantha closed her eyes, her thoughts whirling. I don't know what the future holds for us, she admitted. I need time to process all of this. But I can't ignore the fact that I almost lost you, or that you almost lost everything because of your poor choices and her evil scheme. Edward nodded weakly, too tired to argue. I understand. They sat in silence, letting the gravity of the event settle over them. Finally, Samantha rose to leave, promising to return once he'd rested. Just focus on getting better, she said softly. We'll decide what comes next together, or maybe apart, but we'll figure it out. Outside, Lisa offered Samantha a concerned hug. Samantha leaned into the embrace, her tears finally slipping free. She still loved Edward, but trust was fragile, and it had been shattered. For now, all she could do was take it day by day, step by step. The next few days brought a whirlwind of legalities and media storms. Veronica Jones's arrest became a hot topic in the local news cycle, splashed across tabloids and social media. Paparazzi had photos of Edward appearing incoherent at the party, fueling gossip about what really happened on the Skyline Pavilion Hotel rooftop. Fortunately, the truth emerged quickly. Lisa D'Amico, with her network of journalist connections, released a meticulously documented expose detailing Veronica's plot, the hidden camera, the spiked drink, the orchestrated photographs. Law enforcement corroborated the story, confirming that Veronica had been charged with assault, attempted blackmail, and other related crimes. Thanks to Jack Griffin's evidence, the district attorney had a strong case. Edward, once discharged from the hospital, gave a public statement expressing regret for his personal failings, but clarifying that he had been the victim of a malicious scheme. He publicly thanked his wife, Samantha, for saving him from irreparable harm. Samantha stood behind him during the press conference, poised yet reserved, her emotions masked by a calm dignity. Despite the outpouring of media attention, Samantha had no desire to bask in the drama. She accepted interviews with major news outlets, only to ensure the narrative was accurate, never to seek personal vindication. She stated simply that she hoped justice would be served and that the Harrington family needed privacy to heal. Behind the scenes, Edward and Samantha began marriage counseling. Though their relationship was bruised, they both realized they weren't ready to throw away years of commitment. Each session brought tears, confessions, and the painful unearthing of buried insecurities. Samantha discovered how Edward had felt neglected whenever she immersed herself in her art advocacy, while Edward learned how deeply she valued honesty and loyalty. Meanwhile, Veronica languished in custody. Her lawyer attempted to spin a tale of mutual involvement, but the extensive evidence, including the footage of her drugging Edward, made any defense difficult. She faced a strong likelihood of prison time. Former clients distanced themselves from her, citing the scandal's toxicity. She had become a pariah in the PR world. Lisa resumed her life in New York, content with having helped unearth another scandal. She and Samantha stayed in close contact, texting often to check in on each other's well-being. Jack Griffin, his job done, quietly moved on to other cases, though he promised Samantha he'd be ready to testify if needed. Samantha found herself oscillating between relief that Veronica was no longer a threat and heartbreak over the shattered illusions of her marriage. Her once idyllic view of Edward as a devoted husband was replaced by a more complicated reality. He was flawed, capable of betrayal, yet deeply remorseful and yearning to atone. In a particularly candid counseling session, Samantha confronted Edward. The first need to know, if Veronica hadn't drugged you, would you have eventually left me for her? Tell me the truth. Edward's eyes flooded with tears. No, Sam, I was never going to leave you. I was a coward who wanted excitement on the side, but I was never ready to lose our life together. And that was unfair to both you and Veronica. The first see that now. Though it hurt, Samantha believed him. Sometimes love isn't about illusions of perfection. It's about seeing the flaws and deciding if you can still fight for each other. Weeks passed, and a sense of normalcy began to return. The media frenzy subsided, shifting to new scandals and fresh controversies. The Harrington name remained in the spotlight for a while. Some business partners hesitated, worried about reputational damage. But Edward worked tirelessly to rebuild trust, both at home and in his professional circles. Samantha, meanwhile, threw herself into philanthropic projects, channeling her emotional turmoil into actionable kindness. She organized a new art exhibition in partnership with a local youth center, aiming to raise funds and awareness for underprivileged talent. Standing amid bright canvases and sculptures, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was who she was, an advocate for creativity and passion, someone who found solace in the transformative power of art. At home, Edward took small, deliberate steps to mend the bonds he'd broken. He'd surprise Samantha with her favorite tea in the morning, leave thoughtful notes around the house, or join her for evening walks on the beach near their Malibu residence. He confided in her about the pressures he'd felt to constantly expand his empire. In turn, she admitted she'd sometimes become too absorbed in her personal interests, leaving him feeling unappreciated. Though these revelations stung, each honest conversation brought them closer to forging a new dynamic, one built on transparency. Eventually, the day of Veronica's trial arrived. Samantha and Edward found themselves in a hushed courtroom, side by side, testifying against the woman who had nearly destroyed them. Veronica, thinner and more subdued, sat at the defendant's table, her once captivating poise replaced by defeat. The evidence was overwhelming. The video footage, the testimonies from multiple witnesses, and the forensic toxicology reports. The trial was swift. Veronica was found guilty of multiple charges, including assault with a controlled substance and attempted blackmail. The judge sentenced her to a prison term, stating that her actions displayed a calculated disregard for human life and dignity. As they led her away, Veronica shot Edward a haunted look, as though still incredulous he had spurned her. Then she was gone, swallowed by the legal system. Outside the courthouse, Samantha and Edward faced the press for the final time. Reporters thrust microphones at them, clamoring for statements. Samantha, maintaining her composure, said, "We respect the court's decision and hope this outcome brings closure. We ask for privacy and understanding as we move forward in our lives. That night, back in their mansion, the tension that had gripped them for so long began to ease. Samantha caught Edward's eye over a glass of wine, an unspoken acknowledgement passing between them. They had survived something extraordinary and terrifying. Trust was still fragile, but they were both willing to nurture it, day by day, choice by choice. In a quiet moment, Edward held Samantha's hands in his. "Thank you," he whispered, "for fighting for me even when I didn't deserve it." Samantha's eyes glossed with tears, and she nodded. "I did it for us," she replied softly, leaning into him. "Let's never forget how close we came to losing everything." Months later, the Harringtons found themselves in a very different place, both literally and metaphorically. They decided to spend a long weekend at their Tuscan villa, a timeless stone estate nestled among rolling vineyards and olive groves. With the golden Italian sun shining down, Samantha strolled through the rows of grapevines, brushing her fingers across the verdant leaves, absorbing the serenity of the moment. Edward walked beside her, carrying a wicker basket for fresh produce. He inhaled the sweet, earthy scent of the land. "This place feels like home," he murmured, "like we can breathe again." They had been attending marriage counseling regularly. The sessions were still challenging, but both felt it was worth the effort. In Tuscany, far from the city lights and scrutiny, they found a haven to reflect on the past without being suffocated by it. Samantha had even reached a point where she could talk about Veronica without feeling a surge of fury or heartbreak. She was starting to see her as a symptom of deeper problems that had existed between her and Edward. One evening, they shared a candlelit dinner on the villa's terrace. A soft breeze carried the aroma of rosemary and lavender. Over homemade pasta and local Chianti, they talked about the future. Edward mentioned scaling back on new business expansions, focusing instead on maintaining a sustainable model that allowed him more time for family and personal growth. Samantha spoke of hosting art therapy retreats in the villa, inviting children from underprivileged backgrounds to explore creativity in a nurturing environment. After the meal, they wandered to the edge of the estate, where cypress trees stood tall against the fading light. The sky was streaked with hues of pink and orange, like a living canvas. Samantha turned to Edward, her eyes reflecting the sunset's glow. "We can start over," she said, softly, a hint of a question in her tone. "Not forget everything, but learn and be better." He nodded, gently touching her cheek. "Yes, I think we already have started." They shared a slow, tender kiss, one that felt like a promise renewed. Samantha rested her head on his shoulder, gazing at the horizon. In that quiet moment, she felt hopeful. The emotional scars wouldn't vanish overnight, but the wounds were healing. They had chosen each other, and that choice carried a potent magic all its own. In the days that followed, they realized that their relationship, though once battered by secrets and betrayal, had become more honest and deliberate than it had ever been. They communicated openly, expressing gratitude and vulnerability in ways they hadn't dared to before. The million little cracks in their marriage had been mended, not patched over with illusions, but repaired with the raw mortar of truth and accountability. Their story wasn't perfect, it remained a work in progress. However, the darkest chapter was over, and a new one was beginning. In that chapter, they would hold hands as they faced life's uncertainties together, forging a love that was no longer naive, but deeper and stronger for having survived a storm. And so concludes our tale of betrayal, cunning, and ultimate redemption. The Harringtons emerged from a brutal storm that nearly shattered their marriage, only to forge a bond tempered by honesty and renewed devotion. Veronica Jones, driven by greed and malice, found her schemes undone by Samantha's unwavering resolve and her own lust for power. In the end, what saved Edward wasn't just Samantha's clever plan, but love and loyalty strong enough to fight the shadows lurking in high society's hidden corners. Their journey reminds us that trust, once broken, can be rebuilt provided both hearts are willing to do the work. Thank you for joining us in this real-life drama fiction.
What would you do if the man you loved, the man you legally married the father of your unborn child, tried to erase you not with a whisper, but with a spectacle? Imagine the most opulent wedding of the year, a gathering of the world's elite hosted at the legendary Biltmore estate. The groom, a self-made millionaire, the bride a society heiress. But as the vows are about to be spoken, the grand doors swing open, and there stands a woman, her presence silencing the entire hall. She isn't a guest. She isn't a jilted ex-girlfriend. She's his wife, and she's holding the one thing that can turn the entire glittering affair to ash, the real marriage certificate. Amelia wasn't born into Julian Thorne's world of shimmering glass towers and silent electric cars. Her world had been one of warm, crowded coffee shops, the smell of old books, and the shared dream of building something from nothing. They had met 7 years ago. He was a junior analyst with eyes that burned with an ambition that both thrilled and frightened her. She was a freelance graphic designer who saw the brilliant, insecure man behind the cheap, oversized suit. They fell in love over microwaved dinners in her tiny Brooklyn apartment, their laughter echoing louder than the sirens outside. He'd trace the lines of her palm and swear that one day those hands would never have to work again. Their wedding wasn't in a grand ballroom. It was a simple, heartfelt ceremony at the New York City Hall, with 2 of their closest friends as witnesses. The certificate, a simple document from the state of New York, felt more valuable than gold. It was their foundation, the legal and emotional bedrock of their life together. Julian framed a copy and hung it in their bedroom. Us against the world, he'd whisper, kissing her forehead. And for a while, they were winning. Julian's ambition caught fire. His small tech startup, Thorne Industries, exploded. The Brooklyn apartment gave way to a sprawling penthouse overlooking Central Park. The cheap suit was replaced by custom-tailored Tom Ford. Amelia at first was his biggest cheerleader. She designed his company's first logo, celebrated every milestone, and grounded him when his ego threatened to soar into the stratosphere. But the higher he climbed, the more the air around him thinned. The man who once shared his deepest fears with her now spoke in quarterly reports and stock projections. Their intimate dinners were replaced by sterile charity galas, where she felt like another one of his prized possessions. Her simple elegance scrutinized by women dripping in diamonds. He began to travel more always for critical business. She'd call his hotel only to be told he'd left no forwarding number. He'd return smelling of a perfume that wasn't hers and an exhaustion that felt different from work. The signs were their small fissures in their foundation. A second phone he tried to hide. Vague answers to specific questions. A chilling distance in his eyes, even when he was holding her. Amelia tried to breach the divide. "Julian, we need to talk. I feel like I'm losing you." "Don't be dramatic, Amelia," he'd say, scrolling through his phone. "I'm building an empire for us, for our future. Isn't that what you wanted?" She had wanted a life with him, not an empire without him. The discovery that she was pregnant was for a fleeting moment, a ray of hope. This would save them. A child, their child, would be the anchor they needed. When she told him, his reaction was muted. He smiled, a practiced corporate smile that didn't reach his eyes. He kissed her a peck on the cheek. "That's wonderful news, darling. We'll have to hire a nanny, of course. Get the best." He didn't ask about her. He didn't place a hand on her still flat stomach. He just saw a new asset to be managed. The final soul-shattering blow came not from a confrontation, but from the glossy pages of a magazine. Her friend Chloe had come over, her face pale. She handed Amelia a copy of Tatler, the High Society Bible, and there it was, a lavish 10-page pred. A thorn in Rocher's side, the merger of the century solidified by love. The article detailed the upcoming wedding between Julian Thorne, CEO of Thorne Industries, and Isabella Rocher, the daughter of industrial titan Jean-Pierre Rocher. The wedding was to be the social event of the decade, held at the historic Biltmore Estate in North Carolina. The accompanying photos showed Julian beaming his arm wrapped possessively around a stunning icy blonde. They looked ecstatic. They looked inevitable. Amelia felt the air leave her lungs. The magazine slipped from her numb fingers. It wasn't just an affair. He wasn't just leaving her. He was attempting to publicly and completely erase their existence, their love, their vows, their life. All of it vaporized for a better business deal. He was going to commit bigamy in front of the entire world. The framed marriage certificate in their bedroom seemed to mock her. Us against the world. The world, it turned out, was Julian. For a full day, Amelia did nothing. She sat in the silent penthouse, the city lights twinkling below like a galaxy of indifferent stars. She didn't cry. The shock was too deep, a frozen shard of ice in her chest where her heart used to be. The baby inside her gave a gentle flutter, a tiny, insistent reminder that she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. On the second day, the ice began to crack, and white-hot fury took its place. He thought she was weak. He thought she was a relic of his past that he could simply discard. He had miscalculated. He had forgotten the woman who had believed in him when he had nothing, the woman who had helped build the very ladder he was now kicking away. She picked up the phone. She wasn't calling a friend to cry. She was calling the sharpest, most ruthless family law attorney in New York City. "My name is Amelia Thorne," she said, her voice steady and cold as steel. "My husband is Julian Thorne, and I need to stop a wedding." Marcus Vance was a man who operated in the silent, brutalist canyons of corporate and family law, where fortunes were won and lost on the fine print of a prenup. When Amelia Thorne walked into his office, he saw what most people saw, a beautifully fragile woman, her designer coat failing to hide the grief in her eyes. But when she spoke, he heard something else entirely. He heard precision. He heard fire. "He's not just cheating on me, Mr. Vance," Amelia began. Her hands clasped tightly on the polished mahogany table. "He is attempting to commit felony bigamy in a very public forum, presumably to secure a merger with Rocher Consolidated. He believes I will simply disappear." She laid it all out, the City Hall wedding, the years of shared life, the sudden emotional Arctic freeze, the pregnancy and the Tatler article, which she placed on his desk. She then produced a certified copy of her marriage certificate. Marcus examined the document. It was perfect, ironclad, a public record. "He's either monumentally arrogant or monumentally stupid," Marcus mused, leaning back in his chair. "He's both," Amelia stated flatly. "His arrogance makes him believe he can get away with anything. His stupidity lies in underestimating me." "So what is the goal, Mrs. Thorne?" Marcus asked, his gaze sharp. "Do you want to file for divorce now?" We can file an injunction to stop the wedding, serve him with papers quietly." Amelia shook her head, a slow, deliberate motion. "No. A quiet injunction is what he expects. He'd pay me off. His lawyers would bury me in paperwork and non-disclosure agreements. He'd paint me as a disgruntled, hysterical ex trying to extort him. The world would see him as the victim. The merger would still go through. No." She leaned forward, and for the first time Marcus saw the warrior beneath the porcelain skin. "I don't want to stop it quietly. I want to stop it publicly. I want to be the just cause when the officiant asks. I want every single one of his new powerful friends to see the fraud he is. I want Jean-Pierre Rocher to watch his daughter's fantasy crumble into illegal dust. I want to do it at the altar." Marcus was silent for a long moment. This was not the usual playbook. It was audacious, risky, and could blow back on her in unpredictable ways. It was also, he had to admit, brilliant. It was a strategy of maximum impact. "A public confrontation is a high-wire act," he warned. "They will have security. They will try to remove you, discredit you instantly." "Which is why you'll be there," Amelia countered. "Not next to me, but as a guest. You'll have copies of all the legal documents. When they try to throw me out, you step in. Not as my lawyer initially, but as an officer of the court preventing a felony from being committed in his presence. You will be my legal shield." Over the next 2 weeks, they planned the operation with the precision of a military campaign. Marcus filed the initial divorce proceedings, but put a hold on having them served. The filing created a legal timestamp, proving her actions were premeditated and not a crime of passion. They gathered evidence photos of Amelia and Julian from over the years, affidavits from the friends who witnessed their wedding financial statements, showing their intertwined assets. Amelia, meanwhile, underwent her own transformation. She stopped grieving the man he was and started strategizing against the man he had become. She ate meticulously for the baby's health. She practiced calming breathing exercises, and she researched every member of the Rocher family and the Thorn Industries board. She was no longer a victim. She was a tactician. Her choice of attire was critical. She wouldn't go in rags or in horse-mourning black. That would be playing the victim. She chose a dress of deep sapphire blue, a color of royalty and power. It was elegant, impeccably tailored, and designed to accommodate her barely there 4-month bump. It was a statement of quiet, undeniable presence. The day before the wedding, Amelia flew to Charlotte, North Carolina, checking into a modest hotel far from the opulent resorts where the wedding guests were staying. Marcus was in a separate hotel already on site. They communicated via burner phones. That night alone in her room, a wave of doubt washed over her. The memory of the young, hopeful Julian, the one who kissed her in the rain, came flooding back. Was this vengeful, dramatic act truly who she was? Her hand went to her stomach. The baby kicked a strong, reassuring thump. It was the answer she needed. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. It was about protecting her child from a father who would deny his very existence for profit. It was about claiming her own story, not letting him write it for her. She took out the original marriage certificate from its protective folder. The paper felt heavy, real. It was the one truth in a sea of glittering lies. She slid it into her clutch, a slender, elegant weapon. The next morning, she got ready. Her makeup was understated, but flawless. Her hair was swept into a graceful chignon. She looked in the mirror and saw not the heart-broken wife from 2 weeks ago, but a woman she didn't recognize, and one she deeply admired. She was calm. She was ready. As the chauffeured car she'd hired drove her towards the sprawling fairy tale facade of the Biltmore estate, She knew this day would be the end of a chapter, but it would also be the explosive, unforgettable beginning of a new one. The Biltmore estate was even more breathtakingly ostentatious in person. It rose from the manicured North Carolina landscape like a French Renaissance chateau, a monument to old money, and today, to new lies. Hundreds of the world's wealthiest and most influential people milled about the grand lawn champagne flutes in hand, their polite laughter drowned out by the soaring notes of a string quartet. Amelia's car passed through the main security gate with an authentic-looking invitation Marcus had procured. She'd be just another face in the crowd until the moment was right. She walked through the throng of guests, a ghost from a life Julian had tried to bury. A few people gave her appreciative glances, noting the quiet elegance of her sapphire dress, assuming she was just another guest on the bride's side. The anonymity was a cloak. She found a position in the back of the grand hall where the ceremony was to take place. The room was a symphony of white roses and lilies, their cloying scent thick in the air. A crystal chandelier the size of a small car hung overhead, casting a brilliant, unforgiving light on everything. Then the music changed. The guests hushed. At the far end of the impossibly long aisle stood Julian. He was immaculate in his tuxedo, his face beaming with triumph. He looked every bit the master of the universe. He caught the eye of Jean-Pierre Rocher in the front row and gave a confident nod. This was the pinnacle of his life's work. Then came the bride. Isabella Rocher was a vision in white, a cascade of designer lace and diamonds. She was beautiful, poised, and walking towards a man who was already married. A pang of something close to pity struck Amelia, but it vanished as quickly as it came. Isabella was no innocent. The gleam in her eye was one of victory. She had won the ultimate prize. Amelia's heart began to pound a frantic drum against her ribs. She took a slow, deep breath, her hand unconsciously moving to her stomach. Stay calm. Your moment is coming. The ceremony was a blur of sanctimonious pronouncements about love, trust, and eternal union. Amelia felt a bitter laugh rise in her throat, but swallowed it down. Finally, the officiant, a serene-looking man, who was likely paid a fortune for his role in this charade, reached the pivotal moment. He smiled benevolently at the crowd. Before these two are joined in matrimony, if there is anyone present who has any just cause why they may not be lawfully joined together, let them speak now or forever. Hold their peace. A beat of expectant silence. This was it. From the back of the hall, a single clear voice cut through the stillness. I do. Every head swiveled. The collective gasp was a physical force. Amelia stepped out from the shadows of the rear archway. Her heels clicked with deliberate, measured slowness on the marble floor as she began to walk down the aisle, a solitary figure in deep blue moving against a tide of white. Julian's face went through a rapid, sickening series of transformations. First confusion, then disbelief. His eyes widened, his skin paling to a waxy grey beneath his expensive tan. Isabella looked at him, her perfect smile faltering. Julian. Who is that? Beatrice Thorne. Julian's formidable mother, in the front row, shot Amelia a look of pure venom. Security. Remove this woman at once. Two large men in black suits started moving towards her. But Amelia didn't stop. Her eyes were locked on Julian's. You don't recognize me, Julian? She called out, her voice not loud, but carrying in the acoustically perfect hall. It was the voice he heard every day for 7 years. Perhaps you've forgotten. It's easy to forget things when you're so busy. She was halfway down the aisle now. The guests were on their feet, murmuring phones, starting to discreetly emerge. This was better than a soap opera. "My name," she announced, her voice gaining strength, "is Amelia Thorne, and my just cause for stopping this wedding," she paused, letting the silence stretch, "is the fact that Julian Thorne is already my husband." A wave of shock rippled through the room. Isabella let out a small, strangled cry and took a step back from Julian as if he were suddenly radioactive. "She's lying." Julian finally found his voice, a strained, desperate bark. "She's a delusional ex-girlfriend I had years ago. She's obsessed. Security, get her out of here." The security guards reached for Amelia's arms. "I wouldn't touch her if I were you," a calm, authoritative voice said. Marcus Vance rose from his seat in the third row, straightening his tie. "Assaulting a pregnant woman tends to look very bad on the evening news." The word pregnant dropped like a bomb into the already volatile atmosphere. Isabella Rocher visibly swayed her hand, flying to her mouth. Jean-Pierre Rocher's face was a mask of thunder. "And she is not delusional," Marcus continued, walking, to stand a respectful distance from Amelia. "She is in fact the legal Mrs. Julian Thorne." "Prove it," Julian snarled, his composure shattering completely. "This is a pathetic shakedown." Amelia had reached the front. She was now standing just a few feet from them, the unholy trinity at the altar. She looked at Julian, her expression not one of hatred, but of profound, sorrowful disappointment. "You really should have remembered where you put this, Julian," she said softly. From her elegant clutch, she pulled out a folded document. With a flick of her wrist, she opened it. It was the original State of New York marriage certificate, the embossed seal gleaming under the chandelier light. "We were married on October 14th, 7 years ago, at New York City Hall. Our witnesses were Sarah and Ben Carter. I am 4 months pregnant with his child." Amelia said, her voice now resonating with absolute, unshakable truth. "This ceremony is a fraud. The man you are about to marry, Isabella, is a bigamist and a liar." She held up the certificate for all to see. In the dead silence of the hall, the only sound was the frantic clicking of a guest's phone camera, a sound that signaled the beginning of the end for Julian Thorne. The moment the certificate was revealed, the carefully constructed fantasy of the day didn't just crack. It detonated. The scene at the altar devolved into pure, unscripted chaos. Isabella Rocher stared at the document, then at Julian's ashen face, her own a canvas of dawning horror. "Julian," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Tell me this is a joke. Tell me she's a lunatic." But Julian was cornered, a trapped animal. His eyes darted from Amelia's unwavering gaze to Isabella's pleading face to her father's murderous expression. It's complicated," he stammered the worst possible answer. "Complicated!" Jean-Pierre Rocher's voice boomed from the front row as he strode forward, his face purple with rage. "My daughter's wedding is being crashed by your secret wife, who is carrying your secret child, and you call it complicated. You have 5 seconds to explain this before I personally tear your fraudulent empire apart." The guests were no longer even pretending to be polite. Phones were out everywhere, recording the magnificent social implosion. The string quartet had long since trailed off into a discordant squeak. Whispers turned into audible gasps and frantic speculation. "He's married to her. She looks so normal. Did you hear? She's pregnant. This is a bigger scandal than the Van Adler divorce. Julian, finally realizing his usual tactics of bluster and denial were useless, tried a new deflection. He rounded on Amelia, his face contorted with a vicious snarl. "You did this to ruin me. You were never happy with my success. You're a vindictive gold digger." Amelia didn't flinch. "I was with you when your only gold was the filling in your tooth, Julian. I supported you. This isn't about your success. It's about your character, or the lack thereof." "Get out!" shrieked Beatrice Thorne. Julian's mother, her face a mask of fury. She lunged towards Amelia, her lacquered nails poised like claws. "You will not destroy my son." Before she could reach her, Marcus Vance stepped smoothly between them. "Ma'am, I suggest you calm yourself. What your son has done here constitutes attempted bigamy, a Class E felony in this state. My client is the victim here. Every person with a camera phone is a witness. I strongly advise the Thorne family to stop talking." His words, calm and laced with legal menace, had a chilling effect. Beatrice froze. Jean-Pierre Rocher, a man who understood the language of legal and financial consequence better than anyone, took a deep, shuddering breath. He looked at Julia with utter contempt. "The deal is off," he said, his voice low and deadly. "The merger is dead. You will be hearing from my lawyers. You have publicly humiliated my daughter and attempted to defraud my family. I will see to it that by this time next year, the name Thorne Industries is nothing but a footnote in bankruptcy filings." He turned his back on Julian and wrapped a protective arm around his now sobbing daughter. "Let's go, Isabella." The Rocher family, a formidable unit, turned and began to walk away, a clear and public declaration of war. The dam broke. The guests, sensing the spectacle was over and not wanting to be caught in the fallout, began to flee as if the building were on fire. The hall, once filled with the promise of a glorious union, was now a scene of mass exodus. White roses were trampled underfoot. A forgotten champagne flute lay shattered on the floor. Julian stood alone amidst the wreckage, his perfect tuxedo now looking like a costume on a broken mannequin. He looked at Amelia, his eyes filled not with remorse, but with a horrifying, venomous hatred. This was all her fault. In his mind, she was the author of his destruction, not his own actions. "You will regret this, Amelia," he hissed, his voice barely a whisper. "I will leave you with nothing. You and that thing inside you." The threat, so raw and cruel, finally pierced Amelia's armor of calm. For a second, fear flickered in her eyes. But then she looked past him at the empty aisle, at the wilting flowers, at the ruins of his ambition. He had already lost. He just didn't know it yet. "You have nothing left to take, Julian," she said, her voice quiet but firm. She turned Marcus at her side and began to walk away, leaving him standing alone at the altar of his own making. As she passed the last pew, she could hear the first siren in the distance. The media had arrived. The story was just beginning. The Biltmore estate was no longer a fairy tale castle. It was a media siege camp. News vans with satellite dishes crowded the majestic entrance. Reporters shouted questions, their camera flashes like machine gun fire. Marcus, a master of navigating such chaos, had arranged for a private security team to escort them out through a service exit and into a waiting black SUV. As they sped away, Amelia finally let out the breath she felt like she'd been holding for 2 weeks. Her body slumped against the leather seat, the adrenaline beginning to ebb, leaving a profound, hollow exhaustion in its wake. "It's done," she whispered. "The public part is," Marcus corrected gently, handing her a bottle of water. "The private war is about to begin. He's not just going to roll over." He was right. By the time they landed back in New York, Julian had already launched his counteroffensive. A statement was released by a high-priced crisis PR firm. It painted Amelia as an emotionally disturbed and estranged wife from whom Julian had been separated for years. It claimed the divorce was imminent, and that Amelia's actions were a desperate and calculated attempt to extort a larger settlement. It was a classic smear campaign designed to muddy the waters and salvage what little was left of his reputation. Amelia felt a surge of nausea that had nothing to do with her pregnancy. He was trying to gaslight the entire world. They gathered in Marcus's office, which they now referred to as the War Room. It was stark white, overlooking the city, a sterile command center for the messy battle ahead. "His play is obvious," Marcus said, pacing in front of a whiteboard. "He'll file a motion to have you psychologically evaluated. He'll claim you're unfit. He'll try to use the pregnancy against you, saying your hormones are making you unstable. He wants to discredit you as a witness to his own life." "But we have the marriage certificate, the photos, the witnesses," Amelia argued, her voice rising. "And he has millions of dollars to hire lawyers who can create doubt out of thin air," Marcus countered. "We need more leverage, something he can't spin, something that hits him not in his reputation that's already shot, but in his wallet and his ego." For the next few days, Amelia felt like she was drowning in legal documents and strategic discussions. Julian served her with divorce papers, so aggressive they bordered on harassment, demanding full custody of the unborn child he had publicly denied, and claiming she was an unfit mother. It was a cruel, transparent tactic to scare her into submission. It did the opposite. It erased any lingering sentimentality she had for the man she once loved. This was no longer Julian. This was an enemy. She started digging, not just with Marcus's legal team, but on her own. She spent late nights combing through old emails, bank statements, and documents from the early days of Thorn Industries, a life he thought she had forgotten. She was looking for a vulnerability, a crack in his financial armor. And then she found it. It was in a dusty box in her closet, filled with memorabilia from their first apartment. Tucked inside an old photo album was a document she had barely understood at the time. When Thorn Industries was just a concept, a dream sketched on a napkin, Julian needed a small amount of seed money to incorporate the company. He didn't have it. His parents had refused, calling his venture a pipe dream. Amelia had just received a modest inheritance from her grandmother. It wasn't much, just $50,000, but to them it was a fortune. She had given it all to him without a second thought. In return, he had jubilantly presented her with an official-looking stock certificate. "You're not just my wife, Ames," he had said, kissing her. "You're a founding partner. This makes you a 5% owner of Thorn Industries. One day this piece of paper will be worth millions." She had laughed and put it away, its value purely sentimental. Over the years, as the company grew and went through various rounds of financing, Julian had presented her with stacks of new documents to sign. "Just legal formalities for the new investors, darling," he'd say dismissively. Trusting him, she had signed. She assumed her initial 5% had been diluted into oblivion, worth less than the paper it was printed on. Julian certainly acted as though it had. She brought the certificate to Marcus. "Is this anything?" Marcus took the document, his eyes scanning the formal text the company sealed the date. He was silent for a full minute. Then he looked up, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "Amelia," he said, his voice filled with awe. "This is everything," he explained. Julian had indeed tried to dilute her shares. The papers he'd had her sign were attempts to convert her powerful founder's shares into common stock, which would have rendered them nearly worthless. However, the original incorporation agreement had a clause Amelia herself had insisted on after reading a Business for Dummies book, that any change to the status of founders' shares required a separate notarized affidavit of consent, explicitly explaining the dilution. Julian had never gotten that affidavit. In his arrogance, he thought the sheaf of papers he'd had her sign was enough. He had buried the truth under a mountain of jargon, assuming she would never check. According to this, Marcus said, tapping the certificate, you are not a 5% owner of the current Thorn Industries. Due to stock splits and anti-dilution clauses, you didn't even know you had your original stake, means you own 22% of the entire company. You are the single largest individual shareholder. Larger than Julian. Amelia stared at him, her mind reeling. What does that mean? It means, Marcus said, the smile widening, that you don't have to fight him for a settlement. It means you can call a board meeting. It means you have the power to fire him from his own company. The game had just changed. This was no longer a divorce. It was a corporate takeover. The discovery of the stock certificate in the dusty box was like finding a master key in the middle of a maze. Amelia stared at the ornate, slightly yellowed paper, a relic from a more hopeful time. She remembered the day Julian gave it to her, his face flush with excitement, calling her his founding partner. To her, it had been a romantic gesture, a symbol of their shared dream. To him, it had clearly become an inconvenient detail, a loose end he thought he had long since tied up and buried. In the sterile confines of the war room, Marcus Vance initially viewed the document with professional skepticism. Amelia, in most cases like this, these initial shares are diluted to worthlessness over years of fundraising and restructuring. He probably assumes it's just sentimental paper. He presented me with other documents to sign over the years. Amelia admitted, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. For new investors, he said, just formalities. Marcus's eyes narrowed. Let me see the company's articles of incorporation, their public record. For 10 minutes, the only sounds in the room were the clicking of his keyboard and the frantic beating of Amelia's heart. He pulled up documents on the large screen, his eyes darting between the original certificate and the digital files. A strange stillness came over him. That absolute arrogant fool! He whispered more to himself than to her. He slowly leaned back in his chair, a look of stunned admiration on his face. Amelia. He made a mistake. A colossal one. He explained, his voice gaining excitement with every word. The original incorporation agreement, the bedrock of the entire company, contained a clause, the very one she had insisted on, inspired by a late-night reading binge of business books. It stipulated that any alteration to the ownership class or rights of founders' shares required a separate dedicated notarized affidavit of consent, wherein the potential dilution was explicitly detailed in plain language. Julian, in his haste and towering self-assurance, had buried the conversion attempts in complex legal jargon within stacks of other investment paperwork. He had never gotten that specific separate affidavit. He assumed she'd never notice. He didn't just fail to dilute you, Marcus said, standing up and beginning to pace. The anti-dilution provisions attached to founders' shares, which you never waived, have been triggering with every funding round. Every time he sold a piece of the company, the charter protected your piece. According to these filings, and accounting for 2 stock splits. He stopped and turned to her, his eyes wide. Amelia, you don't own 5%. You own 22%. You are the single largest individual shareholder of Thorn Industries. You own more of it than he does." The air left Amelia's lungs. It wasn't just a weapon. It was an mental arsenal. She wasn't fighting for scraps from his table anymore. She owned the table. A slow, cold fire began to burn in her veins. The grief she had carried for weeks finally burned away, leaving behind something new purpose. The strategy shifted instantly. The defensive crouch became an aggressive forward lean. The first move was executed with the quiet lethality of a sniper's bullet. Through a prestigious, unaffiliated corporate law firm in Delaware, they formally filed the paperwork to have Amelia's share certificate authenticated and her ownership status officially recorded with Thorn Industries Board and the SEC. There was no press release, no announcement. Just a procedural filing that would land like a declaration of war on the desk of Julian's general counsel. The fallout was immediate. Within hours, Marcus's phone began to ring incessantly. Panicked, blustering calls from Julian's legal team were met with calm, unassailable facts. "We are simply correcting a long-standing clerical error in the company's share registry." Marcus would state blandly, refusing to be drawn into an argument. The power dynamic had been irrevocably altered. Julian's motions to have her psychologically evaluated were quietly withdrawn. It was one thing to call a heartbroken wife unstable. It was quite another to level that accusation at your company's largest shareholder. With Julian's camp reeling, Amelia prepared for the second, more public strike. Marcus arranged an exclusive sit-down interview, not with a tabloid journalist who would focus on the salacious details, but with Eleanor Vance, no relation, a senior columnist for the Wall Street Journal, renowned for her sharp, unflinching analysis of corporate America. They prepped for days. Amelia wouldn't be a woman scorned. She would be a guardian of shareholder value. Dressed in a severe but elegant grey suit, she met the journalist in a neutral hotel conference room. She was calm, articulate, and masterful. "Ms. Thorne," the journalist began, "the world knows about the events at the Biltmore. Your husband's camp has painted it as a domestic dispute spilling into public view." "That is the narrative Mr. Thorne would prefer," Amelia responded coolly. "However, I am not here today as a wife. I am here as a founder and the primary shareholder of Thorn Industries, and as such I have a fiduciary duty to address the catastrophic lapse in judgment demonstrated by our CEO. The attempted fraudulent merger with Roche Consolidated was not a domestic issue. It was a corporate action that has exposed this company to billions in legal liability and has erased nearly 40% of our market value in 2 weeks. That is a boardroom issue." She spoke of her deep concern for the company's thousands of employees whose jobs and pensions were put at risk by reckless, ego-driven leadership. She never called Julian a liar. She referred to his verifiably false statements to a potential business partner. She never called him a cheat. She spoke of a breach of the morals clause in his executive employment contract. The final question was pointed. "So what are you going to do?" Amelia looked directly into the camera, her expression one of grim resolve. "The brand's reputation has been severely compromised. Shareholder confidence has been shattered. To protect the future of this company, immediate and decisive action is required. I have therefore used my position as the leading shareholder to formally petition the board for an emergency meeting. The sole item on the agenda will be a vote of no confidence in the current CEO and a motion for his immediate removal." The article landed like a thunderclap. The stock, which had been bleeding out, didn't just stabilize, it jumped 8%. The market understood. This wasn't chaos. It was a coup. It was a course correction. The emergency board meeting was held 3 days later, on the 50th floor. The air in the boardroom was thick with tension and the smell of expensive coffee. The 10 board members sat stiffly around the massive obsidian table. Julian at its head looked gaunt and furious. He watched Amelia enter, flanked by Marcus and a team of corporate lawyers, his eyes burning with a hatred so pure it was almost tangible. She met his gaze with the cool indifference one might show a failing piece of equipment. Ignoring the seat Marcus indicated along the side, Amelia walked to the opposite head of the table, creating a polar opposition to Julian. She remained standing. Julian's ally on the board, a man named Henderson, tried to seize control. This meeting is a farce, a transparently hostile maneuver born of a marital dispute. It is an abuse of corporate process. Before Marcus could respond, Amelia held up a hand. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice cutting through the tension, "my marriage is over. We are not here to discuss it. We are here to discuss the $300 million in shareholder value that Mr. Thorne has personally incinerated in the last month. We are here to discuss the impending multi-billion-dollar lawsuit from Roche Consolidated. We are here to discuss our company's brand being used as a punchline on late-night television. My personal life is the context, but his professional incompetence is the agenda. Do you understand the distinction?" Henderson fell silent. Amelia's gaze swept across the table, meeting the eyes of each director. "I am not here to ask, but to inform. Under his leadership, this company is facing an existential threat brought on not by market forces, but by one man's personal failings. As the person with the most to lose and the most to protect, I am fulfilling my duty." She straightened her shoulders. "I hereby table a motion for a vote of no confidence in CEO Julian Thorne, and for his immediate termination for cause citing gross negligence and breach of his fiduciary and contractual duties." Julian shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "You will not do this. This is my company. I built it from nothing." "You built it with my money," Amelia retorted, her voice dropping to a deadly quiet. "You built it on a foundation you thought was made of my love and loyalty, but it was also made of my stock, and you have run it into the ground with your pride. The board will now vote." The lead director, a stern-faced man named Caldwell, knew there was no other choice. One by one, he called their names. The votes came in, some reluctant, others grimly resolute. The sycophants abstained. The serious directors, the ones who saw their own fortunes dwindling, sided with the woman who had a plan. "The motion carries," Caldwell announced into the stunned silence. 7-3. Julian Thorne is removed as CEO of Thorne Industries, effective immediately. Julian sank into his chair, a choked, guttural sound escaping his lips. The king was dead, and the queen, standing serene and resolute at the head of the table, was just beginning her reign. The silence that fell over the boardroom in the wake of the vote was more profound than any shouting match. It was the sound of a king being deposed in his own court. Julian Thorne, who had entered the room, a titan, seemed to shrink before their very eyes. The bespoke suit that had once projected power now hung on him, like a costume for a part he could no longer play. He stared at Amelia, his eyes a swirling vortex of disbelief, hatred, and for the first time a sliver of genuine fear. The lead independent director cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud. "Julian, as per the board's resolution, your access to company systems will be terminated immediately. Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings." The walk from the boardroom to his office was the longest of Julian's life. He passed secretaries who suddenly found their keyboards fascinating, executives who looked away, and junior analysts who stared with a mixture of awe and pity. These were the people who had feared him, revered him, and envied him. Now he was a ghost haunting the halls of his own fallen empire. Amelia did not watch him go. She remained in the boardroom, coolly discussing transition logistics with the board, her voice the calm epicenter of the storm he had created. Her victory was not in his humiliation, but in her own quiet, unassailable control. For their final meeting, Amelia chose the battlefield of their shared history, the sprawling penthouse overlooking Central Park. When Julian arrived, he found it cold and sterile. The vibrant art they had collected was gone, replaced by pale squares on the walls. The custom furniture was shrouded in white dust sheets, giving the room the atmosphere of a mausoleum. It was a home no longer merely a high-value asset, awaiting liquidation. He was a trespasser in his own past. Amelia stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a silhouette against the glittering cityscape. She didn't turn when he entered. She let the silence stretch, forcing him to confront the emptiness he had wrought. Her hand rested protectively on her now prominent baby bump, a clear and present symbol of the future he had discarded. Finally, he broke. "What do you want, Amelia?" His voice was a rasp, stripped of its usual confidence. "You've taken my company. You've taken my reputation. You've won. What's the point of this final spectacle?" "This isn't a spectacle, Julian," she replied, her voice soft but echoing in the cavernous room. She turned to face him, her eyes clear and devoid of the hatred he expected. What he saw was far more devastating. It was pity. "This is an exit interview. I wanted to look you in the eye one last time, not as my husband or my enemy, but as the co-founder of a life we once planned to build." She gestured to the shrouded furniture. "I remember when we bought that sofa. You were so proud because it was the first thing we bought that wasn't from a second-hand store. You told me it was the beginning of our empire. An empire for us." She took a step closer, her gaze unwavering. "You were the one who turned our life into a business, Julian. A series of assets and liabilities. So I learned to speak your language. I'm just here today to finalize the dissolution of our partnership." He flinched, the words striking him more painfully than any shout. "So what are the terms? What pound of flesh do you want now? I don't want your flesh. I want my freedom. And more importantly, I want my child's," she stated. "So here are the terms of your surrender. First, the divorce will be uncontested. You will not fight it. You will not delay it. You will sign whatever is put in front of you. The settlement will be generous, drawn from your personal assets, the accounts and properties that predate my involvement on the board. I am leaving you with more than enough to disappear and start again. I am not leaving you destitute. That was your plan for me, not mine for you. Second, she continued, her voice hardening, you will sign away any and all legal claim and parental rights to this child. You will have no custody, no visitation, no contact, ever." A flicker of his old entitled self ignited. "You can't do that. He's my son. My blood." "Is he?" Amelia's voice was laced with ice. "You stood before God and 1,000 people and prepared to commit a felony, an act that would have legally declared this child illegitimate. You stood in that grand hall and called him a thing inside me. You don't get to claim him in the dark after you denied him in the light. This isn't a punishment, Julian. It's a protection. I am protecting my son or my daughter from a father who sees love as a liability and family as a merger opportunity. They deserve to be cherished, not leveraged. The child will bear the Thorn name because it is a legacy I have now cleaned and redeemed. They will inherit the better part of it. Finally, she said, walking over to a starkly modern coffee table, the only piece not covered by a sheet. On it sat a single thick folder. You will sign this. It's a mutual non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreement, ironclad and perpetual. You will never speak of me or my child to anyone. Not to the press, not to your friends, not in a tell-all memoir 10 years from now. You will become a ghost, and in return I will afford you the same courtesy. The world will move on, and Julian Thorn will simply be a business footnote. He stared at the folder, a bitter, broken laugh escaping his lips. And if I refuse? What if I decide to drag this through the mud for years? Amelia looked at him, not with anger, but with a weary finality. I truly hoped you wouldn't ask that, but I planned for it. If you refuse, then tomorrow morning, as acting chairwoman of the board, I will authorize a full, deep-dive forensic audit of Thorn Industries, covering the entire period of your CEO tenure. We'll bring in the best investigative accountants in the country. She let the threat hang in the air. I wonder what they'll find. Perhaps we could start with the undeclared corporate accounts in the Cayman Islands you used for the Rocher deal's preliminary gifts, or the millions in consulting fees paid to shell corporations that trace back to your mother. Or maybe just the simple common fraud of using corporate funds for the down payment on Isabella's ridiculous engagement ring. I was your partner for 7 years, Julian. I know where you cut the corners. She saw the blood drain from his face. She had him, completely. You have 2 paths, and you will choose one now. You can sign this folder, take your millions, and vanish with some dignity intact. Or you can refuse, and I will dedicate a significant portion of the company's resources to ensuring your next board meetings are with the district attorney. Choose. Slowly, like a man moving underwater, he walked to the table. His hand trembled as he reached for the pen. He didn't read the documents. He knew it didn't matter. He signed page after page, his signature, once a bold assertion of power, now the hurried scrawl of a defeated man. He pushed the folder back towards her and turned to leave a stooped figure silhouetted against the door. He didn't look back. Amelia stood alone in the quiet, empty room for a long time, listening to the hum of the city. There was no triumphant surge, no thrill of victory. There was only a vast, quiet, and profound sense of peace. The war was over. The weight she had carried for so long had finally been lifted. She placed both hands on her belly, feeling the strong, steady kick of the new life within. This was her true north, the reason for the fight, the purpose for the victory. Her future was no longer an empire of glass and steel, but one of unconditional love and limitless possibility. She wasn't a scorned wife or a corporate raider. She was Amelia Thorn, a mother, and she was finally, irrevocably free. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a wedding crashed or a cheater exposed. It was a story about the immense power that lies dormant in those who are underestimated. Amelia Thorn walked into that hall as a victim and walked out as a victor, not because of revenge, but because she chose to fight for her truth with intelligent strategy and unwavering courage. She proved that the strongest foundations aren't built on money or fame, but on integrity and self-worth. She didn't just reclaim her life. She rebuilt an empire on her own terms for the future of the one person who mattered most, her child. What would you have done in her shoes? Let us know in the comments below.